right, you happily miserable accursed. Herle here with our political panel, Leichnitz, Reid, and Teneycke. Packed agenda today, so let's get right to it. Leichnitz Teneycke not only is the former three-term mayor of Calgary now in the mix for the Alberta NDP leadership, he says he knows how to get under Danielle Smith's skin. We'll talk about that. There is full frontal provincial opposition now to the carbon tax. Liberal Premier Andrew Furey in Newfoundland now wants it delayed. Trudeau says he's caving into political pressure. So Minister Wilkinson was dispatched to appear on Rosemary Barton's show yesterday, where he defended the tax. That's our cursed clipping today. And who among us doesn't dream of getting a pleasant 6-page letter from Doug Ford? He sent one to Trudeau outlining Ontario's priorities, asking for billions in investments. Big shift here for the Ford-Trudeau relationship. We'll break that down. And then it's the great Mr. Pinson calling for our Hey You. Scott, Jordan, Kory's in Dublin celebrating St. Patrick's Day, actually in Ireland. I hope he's in Berlin for Oktoberfest next fall, but in any event.
That would be the only one where if I dressed up, it wouldn't be cultural appropriation. I'm half German by lineage.
I can say for sure they'll allow that.
Total cultural. France, green tams and vests in Ireland, yeah.
Look at you. So give us a feel. You're in a bar in Dublin on St. Patrick's Day. What's the deal?
Amazing live music would be the first thing that I would say. Like even walking down the street, like Nicole and I were walking about just before we got on here. There's like a 12-year-old kid who had, musical chops that you would expect from a professional musician. Just incredible music everywhere you turn here. We were at a bar last night celebrating. I think I drank all of the Guinness in Dublin. It might be out this morning. But there was one guy with a guitar who was entertaining 3 floors of this pub and had everybody on their feet and singing at the top of their lungs. It was incredible. It was just a really amazing experience. It's a cool city. If you haven't been, you should come and check it out.
You obviously have some restraint because I know for a fact that there's no chance that Reid could spend St. Patrick's Day in Ireland and not end up in jail.
No question.
Well, the guards here, which is what they call the police, have got to be the politest police force in the world. Like, I think you would have to work super hard to get arrested.
I thought people in Canada were saying that our police forces were quite polite.
Well, I think it's...
They invite you into your home. Here, leave the keys to the front and the door wide open.
Polite with another attribute, David.
There's some pie on the counter. Help yourself.
They've mastered the art of diffusing conflict here. There's like lots of friendliness everywhere you turn, even from bar bouncers. It's a different vibe for sure.
Right.
My question is, how long does this transformation last? I mean, I saw the pictures from Saturday. I saw the pictures from Sunday. You show up here in a wool vest and a knit cap. You look like a fucking stable boy. How long does the cultural cosplay continue?
It's my cosplay will end probably shortly because this is really warm. Yeah, it's good for outdoors though. There's a reason they're wearing wool here. It rains about every 15 seconds. So it's very appropriate for the weather. Although it is most definitely cultural appropriation.
All right, before we get going, Reid, I'm just going to give you one warning. You got an hour to think this through. But I don't know if you noticed the album behind me, Knocked Out Loaded by Dylan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometime in this podcast, you have to use a quote from Brownsville Girl.
Okay.
Yep. All right.
That's not hard.
Nenshi.
I think about it all the time. It's on my mind almost constantly, that song.
Agreed. Almost more than the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's definitely Scott's Roman Empire.
Leichnitz Nenshi declared last week for the NDP leadership in Alberta. He has the support of Jan Arden, so presumably that's all he needs. Good to go. He's a celebrity. He's from Calgary, which the NDP need. He's got proven political chops over years of being a national figure while being the mayor of Calgary. So he's got all that going for him, but he's not a New Democrat. He's not a New Democrat. He never joined the party until he wanted to lead it. That's a problem in the Liberal Party. You can ask Bob Rae. So I bet it's a bigger problem in the NDP. Jordan, what do you think about this?
Well, I think it's a great leadership race. Like, holy shit, it's going to be really wonderful politics to watch. And I think that Yeah, for for all the political watchers across the country who value a good show, this is about to be one over the next few months. And then she's entrance into the race is sort of further proof of what a prize the NDP. I mean, can you imagine if 10 years ago we would be talking about the NDP leadership in Alberta being a prize? So I think my first thought is that overall it's so great to see such a strong level of competitiveness. Yeah, I think Nenshi had a really good week. I think he needed to have a good week. He needed to enter with the right tone and with the right answer to the question of his newfound love for partisan politics in general, of course, for somebody who's really built a brand on rejecting partisan politics. It's a tricky pivot to all of a sudden enter into arguably the most partisan of spaces, which is a leadership race. And I think he did not a bad job this week in terms of messaging that. He's out talking about shared values with the party in terms of public service, defending the vulnerable, things like that. So, I mean, that's a good message box. No question, he's going to bring in a lot of members, a ton of interest. This race is really, I think, a national story now because of his entrance into it. But of course, he can be a polarizing figure, and I think some of the data we've seen so far does bear that out. I think that he also has a challenge that the Alberta NDP is a small club, as clubs go. And so pretty much everybody who is currently a member in the party, there's a lot of folks there who worked with Nenshi in some capacity when he was mayor. And so a lot of those people, they have opinions about him, and they're not all favorable. So I think that one of the challenges that he has to answer is to the charge of whether or not he's a team player, whether he is somebody who, for example, can manage a caucus. How does that look? What does that look like? Or is it a team of one? And so that's something he's going to need to speak to a little bit. I think his campaign has pretty clearly tried to lead with the soft edge there, with the values piece, and I think that's the smart way to go.
Are there Mulcair comparisons?
There are Mulcair comparisons. This is what I was going to say. I think there's definitely Mulcair comparisons, in the sense that NDP members and I include in that folks who are open to the NDP enough that they would sign up for a leadership race, I think are often much, much greater pragmatists than outsiders would think. And for example, Tom's election as leader in the wake of Jack's death was a case of members hiring for a very specific job description. They wanted to win and they wanted to hold Quebec. Okay. So they hired for that job description, and they were able to set aside the fact that Tom was not a New Democrat, right? And that it ended up being secondary to whether members saw him as somebody who could tick that one box, and that worked to get him elected. It also got him unelected, right? Because when you don't fulfill the job description, that was enough, So there wasn't sometimes New Democrats want to love their leaders, and certainly that's something that you really saw with Rachel Notley. There is a deep reservoir of love and respect for her within the party, among members and among a broad swath of progressive Albertans. But they don't necessarily need to love their leaders. So I think that obviously right now, Alberta is a two-party state. So the NDP is planted firmly within the center left in Alberta. So you have a pretty big universe of people there who would consider Nenshi very interesting. And I do think it's very possible that they will put aside whether he can pass some sort of purity test to elect him. But I don't think it's his to walk away with. I think it's going to be competitive. And the reason I say that is that you've got a pretty strong field, particularly among the sitting MLAs there. So, I think particularly Rachel Hoffman, Rakim Pancholi, they are out there, and I think Kathleen Ganley has a big challenge. Obviously, her Calgary advantage has been a bit scooped with Nenshi's entrance, but you're setting up there.
Rakim Pancholi is my favorite because she listens to the pod.
Well,
and she came up to me in a restaurant in Golden, BC a couple of years ago to tell me that she listens to the pod.
Well, a big shout out there. I know many Alberta New Democrats who listen to the pod with great interest and occasional frustration and mostly me. So I'm sorry about that, friends. But Yeah, so I think that there's going to be obviously a really strong, now there's a race for who is the anti-Nenshi candidate, right? Who is going to carry that banner? And because it's a ranked ballot, it's also, that adds then that other dynamic in that each candidate needs to consider where second choice is going to go. So I think that lends itself to a really, really interesting race. Everybody's bringing different strengths. You know, you've got, I think Nenshi is many things, but he's not a populist. And right now, Alberta is in a mood, and populism, it goes really, really far. And that's a template that I think a lot of NDP members are looking to. I think that every candidate is going to need to answer how they're going to win outside of Calgary and Edmonton. It's great. You need Calgary and Edmonton, but you also need to have a path outside of those seats in some of the smaller cities and in the rural areas. So there's a lot to consider. Each candidate brings different strengths to the table on that. But overall, I think Nenshi's entry into the race is good news for the party. It really ups the quality, ups the energy, and we're going to have a really great race. So you can still sign up members until the end of April. So I think watch really carefully who's drawing the crowds and how that's all going down.
So I've been teasing something for weeks now in this space. The idea that a set of regulatory conditions are under review by the CRTC and how that might play out for the greatest benefit to Canadians. So let's swan dive right into those waters on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Only a metaphor, friends. Please do not conjure any imagery of Herle in a bathing suit executing a swan dive. That's even more dangerous for you than it is for me. Right now, the CRTC is reviewing the existing framework for the wholesale of high-speed internet access. We're hungrier than ever for high speed, and this review is designed to determine the best way to provide Canadians with choice and affordability. Among the options they're exploring, should they mandate wireline fiber internet to the premises? That's FTTP for you acronym fans. And how best to possibly do it in a way that promotes competition. I don't need to tell you listeners just how much experience TELUS has with building world-class fiber networks. It's been the subject of so many of these messages. They are literally invested in the communities they serve, improving how we access healthcare and education, making our food supply more efficient and climate-friendly, helping tens of thousands of local businesses sell to the world. And TELUS has had a voice at these proceedings. They presented data backed by government agencies and experts in the field that if a new mandate is required, the best way to roll it out is to account for the vast differences region by region across the country. A one-size-fits-all solution will not serve all Canadians equally. They've also said this: the best way to foster competition in this space, while continuing to ensure our high-quality networks, is to require any new competitor to have some skin in the game, to continue to invest in our communities by building and innovating their networks. Lots more story to tell on this, Hurly-Burlyites, including all the proof points. Stay tuned. Scott, I don't know if it was just sort of the way Central Canadian media presented this, but it kind of felt like his entry into the race was a big foot on everything else, on everybody else that was in it already.
But I think that kind of reflects his name and profile. And yeah, I guess that's positive for the party, in the same way that Jordan's saying, is that it indisputably suggests that the party is a desirable destination for a successful politician, someone who had success in a really profound way at the municipal level and built a national profile as a consequence, much less a provincial profile. I can fulfill your request for a Dylan quote right away. I would start with reference to Nenshi and my attitude toward his entry into this NDP race. It's line comes from Brownsville Girl, it's funny how things never work out the way you had them planned. The only thing we knew for sure about Henry Porter is that his name wasn't Henry Porter. And I have a feeling this thing could work out the way it's not planned. I have to divorce my analysis from my bias. I don't like Nenshi. I'm just going to be flat out about it. I don't like his manner at all. I never have. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a story that just anchors this. And again, this may be too small a sample of experience to base this on, but it always left me with a bad impression. It always left me with a bad taste in my mouth. 10 years ago, for a year, I hosted a show on CTV called CTV National Affairs. And Nenshi, who was then a relatively recently elected mayor of Calgary, first Muslim mayor elected, all this, and, won the downtown vote, marshaled a different electorate, really a lot of storm and hue around this guy, and came on the show. And I thought, I was attracted to meeting him. I was curious to see him in action. I put a question to him, and he gave me a very talking points answer. So I pushed him, and I asked him a harder question and sort of, chiseled at him a bit. And he literally turned around and said, I don't know what kind of show you're running here. And oh, sorry, I'm not permitted to ask you a question that isn't, how wonderful is it to be you? It left a very negative impression with me. I've always gotten that sense of superiority off of him. I do think he's a carpetbagger. But, you look at it and you say, well, maybe the guy's demonstrated that he can win. He's demonstrated that he can mobilize a different electorate. You add that to the NDP's existing base. Perhaps that means after, maybe people will be tired of Daniel Smith a bit, and maybe there's an opportunity to win. Maybe all that makes sense. But it feels like a rental to me if the NDP pick him. And it feels like it's going to be just like Dylan sings, things never turn out the way you had them planned. And it feels like Ignatieff swooping in to rescue the Liberal Party. It feels like Mulcair coming in to rescue the federal NDP. It feels to me like a rental. They're using their party as a rental. And you know what I do with a rental? I drive the living shit out of it, and I leave it busted down and uncared for. And I guess I would just, now there are people around Nenshi I really like. I think the world of Zane. I think he is just one of the great people in Canadian politics. So I hope he'll correct me and put me on the course to see in Nenshi what I've always failed to see. But I'm not a believer. And I think this thing looks so transparently forced and opportunistic. And I don't think that he's capable of answering that question in a humble way, because I've never detected humility from this guy. Never seen a mirror he didn't want to stop and linger in front of. So I'm not convinced.
So we'll see.
There's a poll out this morning, Kory, that I found pretty interesting, because Scott talks about adding Nenshi to the NDP base. And the poll's pretty interesting because it appears that the NDP base is different from the Rachel Notley base. I mean, what this poll that's out this morning really tells me is how popular Rachel Notley is, and how difficult it will be to replace her. Because according to this poll, Nenshi, with all the publicity he got and all the profile he has, does about as well as Rachel Notley does against Danielle Smith. And all the other contenders do significantly worse. Right. And it underscores the fact that the Alberta NDP are going through their first important leadership race in their history. And they are trying to transfer from being the Rachel Notley party to the New Democratic Party of Alberta. This is an interesting moment for them.
Yeah, I think it is, but I think they're on the right track to go outside of the party for that reason. And I'll point to some other examples with the NDP that I think bear that out. David, you and I listened to Wab Kinew in Toronto speaking to the Economic Club a few weeks ago.
Very good.
Really, really, really good speech. Impressive. The guy has got communication skills and political chops. It was a pleasure to meet some of the members of his team who are very thoughtful and very, very solid. But he came from outside the party. He's a journalism background. He wasn't a partisan activist, but clearly a progressive and somebody who was on the issues attuned with a lot of things that the NDP speaks to. So it's not a big leap. But when you look at some of the other politicians, Jack Layton, he was a municipal politician, and not his father was a cabinet minister for Brian Mulroney, for God's sake. So he's from and I'll use another one from the prairies, Roy Romano from the blessed province of Saskatchewan. He could have run for the Liberals. He could have run for the PCs even. Romano, before actually deciding to jump into the ring as a politician, was very much in the middle of the ideological fairway, and I think would have been happy running for whatever party would have him and where he could be successful. So I think there's some great examples of picking people outside the party working well for the NDP. I kind of agree with Scott. At a personal level, I think he's a bit of an asshole, and comes across as a bit of an asshole. He can be very chippy. He's got some of the same impulses in dealing with the media, frankly, that we've seen from Poilievre. It's just a little more unlikely seeing those from someone on the progressive left than a conservative, because I view that there's naturally a more adversarial relationship between the media and conservatives, and I think in the case of Poilievre, serves him well to be chippy with them. But we'll see how he plays out. It's moving from one level to another, and not everyone makes that transition very well. But I think in this case, it's probably a smart play for the NDP, and I'll defer to Jordan in terms of what his probability of success will be. But from my seat, it seems like a good thing for the race overall, and I don't see anything precluding him from being very successful at the provincial level. That said, outside of the larger urban areas, he's going to have the same challenges that all NDP leaders have in the province, and I think that's going to be a mission of long-term diplomacy and bridge building. I'm not sure that that's really what his track record has been as mayor. I think he's more of a pugnacious debater and sparring partner. In fact, I believe back in high school, he and Ezra Levant were co-members of the same debating team. They were partners going into debates, which is
that's not making me like him any fucking more.
Sort of interesting factoid, but I do think
Ezra Levant's a stockaholic.
Right.
Right.
I'm a stockaholic.
Well, say what you will, positive or negative about Ezra. He's a hell of a debater, and he and Nenshi share some, I think, common traits in terms of how they approach debates and framing their opponents. So, he's not going to be a pushover. I think he's probably right. He will get under Danielle Smith's skin, but I think the reverse is true as well. I think no one would ever say that Danielle is anything other than a smart and skilled political communicator. She's demonstrated that, I think, pretty effectively.
So let me tell you a bit about logos. Basically, you got to have a logo, at least if you want to fix yourself in the public consciousness. A logo is the ultimate abbreviation. Done right, it bonds the mind of the viewer with the company or team or individual it represents. Some logos are so spectacularly successful that if they didn't exist, someone would have to invent them. Like the C on the Montreal Canadiens jersey, or the Mercedes-Benz star, or the apple with the bite out of it. And then there's our sponsor, CN. Which of us hasn't sat in a car at a railway crossing and watched that logo fly by on an endless procession of boxcars? The CN logo is a continuous flowing line, combining the C and the N into an image that suggests fluidity and motion. It was invented by a fellow named Alan Fleming and unveiled 64 years ago. When he presented it, Fleming said it was actually meant to resemble a railway route line, which, quote, represents the movement of people, materials, and messages from one point to another, unquote. But it's become much more than that, obviously. It practically shouts Canada 1,000 times a day, in 1,000 places, all over this country and the US. It relentlessly reminds everyone who glimpses it of Canadian know-how and success. All that from a single curvy line. Pretty cool. All right, Jordan, quick wrap up to this conversation for now.
Yeah,
let me put a question to you, because
yes.
I've got a question. Which is, I've got an axiom about Liberal leadership races, which is there's never been a situation where the Liberal Party had a consensus about who was most likely to win an election for them and chose somebody else. That is, if there's a clear person who's going to win an election, that is the person the Liberal Party will choose as its leader, right? Are things in the Alberta NDP going to be more complicated than that, or is that the question?
Yeah, I would say two things. I don't think that there's necessarily a consensus that Nenshi would win the election. I think that's still a live debate. That the leadership candidates are, everybody's got to make their case about what their path is in a general, right? So I think that's the first marker there. And now the second one is if it is determined that Nenshi is the only one who can win, does that strongly favor him? Sure, it does. But I think we all know also that ranked ballots can produce some unexpected results. And particularly...
Dion.
Right? So particularly if you end up with an anybody but Nenshi camp that coalesces, right, in a really strong way, then I think you can get some unpredictable results. So I don't think, look, there's no question. He's the front runner right now, but I don't think he's walking away with it. I think that we're going to see some pretty lively back and forth with, particularly, as I said, it's Pancioli, it's Hoffman, it's Ganley, that you're going to see, I think, a really competitive race, especially over the next month or so. But I concur with Kory and Scott. I think that one of Nenshi's challenges is the way that his campaign has presented him is a version of Nenshi that doesn't square with what a lot of people know of him, right? And so this is some of the same challenge that we've talked about, for example, with Poilievre in terms of the rebranding to soften him, to present him as a bit more of a warm and fuzzy.
You think they should do a commercial with Nenshi playing with Poilievre's baby?
I mean,
that
maybe.
would be interesting.
No, but I mean to say that these are tricky, right? It's tricky when you try to kind of revamp your personality for the purposes of a campaign, because the longer it goes on, the harder that can be to hold together, right? And if the mask slips, if it's not authentic to who you are, it can really be counterproductive, right? So I think that that's something that his campaign has to watch, because if they diverge from who Nenshi actually is in the debates that we're going to see, in his interactions with other candidates, then that could certainly set them back.
Okay, Kory and Scott. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in with two quick points, generally speaking, about these types of leadership races with the ranked ballot. First, to answer your question, winnability, I think, irrespective of what party you're in, is always a ballot question in a leadership race. And but where things get a little weird is when you have a strong front runner candidate. I think you really have got to be in the low 40s at the very minimum, probably 45-ish% on ballot one, or you're toast. And then you don't get a winnable candidate. Then you get a Stéphane Dion, or an Andrew Scheer, or someone who is down ballot but slowly moves their way up, and really is not a person who there is even consensus in the party is really a strong candidate. So winnability, number one issue in every race I've seen. It's just sometimes these ranked ballot systems come up with some really weird answers if the front runner is below 45.
So Kory and Scott, you're both experienced door knockers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How would you mark Jordan on Nenshi? I say undecided, but I was always a generous door knocker.
I would say leaning UCP.
I mean, Scott, only my own people can drive me there.
As Canada aims to achieve a net zero emissions economy by 2050, the clean energy sector will play a vital role in electrifying more parts of the economy that currently rely on fossil fuels, such as transportation, home and water heating, and heavy industry. Today, almost 85% of Canada's electricity comes from clean sources, and to reach its climate goals, Canada will need to build on that success. Today's podcast sponsor, Bruce Power, is a nuclear generating facility in Tiverton, Ontario, that currently supplies about 30% of Ontario's electricity and is committed to helping Canada achieve its economic and climate change objectives. Recent studies suggest Canada's electricity supply will need to at least double by 2050. And as this demand grows, we have to make sure supply remains affordable, reliable, and clean. Bruce Power is refurbishing its fleet to secure a reliable supply of clean electricity to at least 2064. and is investing in increasing the energy it produces from its existing reactors. Investing in clean electricity means cleaner air, better health, and more jobs as we build Canada's clean energy economy. All right, let's move on to what is now an intrafamily split over the carbon tax inside the Liberal Party. As the Prime Minister and the Newfoundland Premier got into it last week. Newfoundland Premier joined 6 other premiers in asking for a pause on the carbon tax. The Prime Minister really is obviously feeling this issue. And I heard you guys talking about this on Question Period this week, so I don't mean to just repeat what you said, but he's obviously feeling it. And the evidence is that he took 8 minutes to answer a question about this from a journalist. He's really obviously feeling the need to try to win this argument and get this argument out there. In the process, though, he's gone after Fury and basically diminished him, said he was just doing politics and bowing to pressure and not doing the right thing for Newfoundlanders. It sort of belies the fact that the Liberal leaders of all 4 Atlantic provinces are against this increase in the carbon tax. Obviously, the Atlantic carve-out, God, I'm going to get in so much trouble. Obviously, the home heating oil carve-out.
It's not a geographic carve-out, David. Don't
It is
fall
not.
for the
It applies to more people in Ontario, blah, blah, blah. The home heating oil carve-out obviously did not solve the carbon tax problem in Atlantic Canada as far as anybody involved in politics in Atlantic Canada is concerned. So we've got a clipping from CBC News from Rosie Barton's interview. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says provincial premiers who are calling on the government to scrap a planned increase on the carbon tax have their facts wrong. In an interview aired Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live, Wilkinson defended the federal government's landmark climate policy against a growing chorus of provincial leaders who hope to either delay or ditch altogether the impending April 1 increase. Based on facts, the 7 premiers are just wrong, Wilkinson told guest host David Common. Wilkinson's comments are a continuation of a defense of the carbon tax by federal officials, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, on the grounds of affordability. Removing or pausing the carbon tax, they argue, would hurt more people than it helps because of reduced rebates. I think we need to do a better job of communicating the affordability dimensions of the price on pollution because it is something that makes life more affordable, Wilkinson said. Scott, I'm going to start with you. I'm just going to say the affordability angle. First of all, I've looked at the PBO report, and the facts of the matter are that this tax is a marginal effect on affordability either fucking way. Right? The costs on the people it costs money to are relatively small, given that they're in the top quintile of incomes. And the gains to anybody below that are also extremely marginal. So I don't actually see it in reality as an affordability issue, but it's playing out as an affordability issue. But how can it be? Like, Scott, what is the logic of this? I mean, that the rebate makes life more affordable. I mean, if that was the case, why wouldn't you triple the rebate and solve the affordability crisis? Not triple the rebate, triple the tax and solve the affordability crisis.
Tax people right into the clay and see how much better they are off then. I'll go back to Dylan and Brownsville Girl. He's so universal in his application. But they changed the subject every time money came up. That's a great line from that song. And I think that should be their approach. I mean, we've seen multiple answers, multiple strategies belied by multiple answers. And we've seen sort of multiple constructions. Everyone, lots and lots and lots of Liberals. I see it online. I hear it in Wilkinson's statement. Lots of people in the Liberal Party and the government keep saying things like, I just don't think we need to do a better job of communicating. And I'm not convinced that that's the case. I just don't think that you can take someone, you can dislike Trudeau all you want, but you can't take somebody who's as skilled in his practice of political and public communication as he is, and watch what he went through this week. I think it's a real breaking point, this period between now and the April 1st increase, because you can see the government literally dissembling as it attempts to figure out how to defend this and how to turn it around. And it's, from my perspective, it's not about communicating. You are stuck with something that is deeply unpopular. You cannot pretend that it is what it is not. And I think they're under real pressure. My advice would be that they need to do something substantive. And I do think that if they wish to drive the affordability argument, one question would be, why not use the budget? If you're not going to go whole hog in reverse on the carbon tax completely, which was an option I think should have been contemplated, particularly around the time of the home heating exemption, because you were just basically saying, I now have no intellectual coherence or integrity here. But if you didn't do that, then if you're not going to just go whole hog on it, I wonder about rapidly and significantly increasing the rebate, but not using the tax system to do it. Literally sending people rebate checks, because I think one of the problems, obviously, is that people see the tax when they fill their gas tank and when they receive their heating bill. But the rebate, the promised benefit, comes through the tax system, and you get, yes, you get rebate checks depending on where you're at in terms of income level, but it's just so ephemeral. So I think, if they want people to believe the rebate and affordability argument, then I think they should jack the rebate. And I know that raises all sorts of other issues, but absent
you mean
that,
de-link the rebate from the tax?
Absolutely.
Raise the rebate.
Just raise the rebate and say this is this flows from the carbon tax. This ameliorates the carbon tax and other affordability issues. But I don't think that they can get no amount of explaining or clever communication, and the communication, let's be clear, has not been very fucking clever. No amount of it is going to allow people to think, well, this tax that I hate is actually the principal arrow in the quiver against affordability challenges. It's just not compelling. So if you want to make that argument, do something more compelling on the affordability
They're not
side.
even selling it, Scott, as a climate change initiative anymore. If you listen to Wilkinson or Trudeau, now it's affordability. Now, we have this tax now to make people better off. That is the argument. Right. And that is an inconceivably bad argument.
Absolutely it is. And the last thing I'll just say is this, but it's on this point. Which
Why are you laughing, Kory?
But if you're it highlights an important point.
It's happened all the way to the fucking ballot box.
If you're unable to argue, if you're unable to argue the efficacy of the instrument in terms of combating climate, if you can't argue that it is affecting behavior and it is reducing emissions, and there really is no basis to argue that, you can't make that argument credibly, well, then you do have to say to yourself, what are we doing? Well, why are we enduring this agony? It's not affecting the problem that it began to affect, that it was launched to affect. It's not helping, it's hurting us politically. And you can see the government struggling so painfully to deal with it. But they've got themselves painted in this corner, and those around them who say, well, if we turn tail on this, we are literally legitimately about fucking nothing. Okay, I get that. Well, but I don't know.
But that might be better off than what we're about right now.
Any option that's above, I put this course test to it. Any option that's above 22% in popularity is an improvement from where you are. And I'm not being glib when I say that. No. I mean, literally, that's how you have to start to think about the next 15 months if you're this government.
No. Here's something you might not catch in today's political discourse. Alberta is at the forefront of the energy future, driving technological advancements that offer the promise of resilience against the backdrop of wildfires, heat waves, and droughts. The University of Alberta is central to this revolution, spearheading globally recognized research in sustainable resource and energy development. Through the ingenuity of researchers like Jason Olfert, who has crafted one of the most cost-effective hydrogen solutions worldwide, and Arvind Rajendran, whose collaboration with industry has pioneered cutting-edge carbon capture technologies, they're not just confronting climate change, they're turning it into an opportunity for economic prosperity. Their collaborative efforts are steering Canada toward a vibrant future economy, where investment in research paves the way for the energy solutions of tomorrow. It's a testament to Canadian ambition and ingenuity, championed by U15 Canada as a proud member of the Coalition for Canadian Research. The Coalition is urging the federal government to support science and talented Canadian researchers with new funding this budget. We have to support Canadian ambition. Full stop. Visit researchcoalition.ca to learn more. Kory, you're itching to get in here.
I just got to say, saying that increasing taxes is like the path to affordability for people is like sidling up to the all-you-eat buffet and calling it a weight loss plan. Like, give me a fucking break.
There's an all-you-can-eat KFC in Weyburn.
Oh, is
not Weyburn.
Wow.
In I think it's actually Melville. I think Melville.
Well,
all-you-can-eat KFC. Yeah.
That would be a dangerous place for me to hang out. But
Checks out.
I've got to say though, this notion that increasing taxes is a way to make life more affordable. I wish the new marketing helper at PMO all the luck in trying to sell that line of bullshit, because there isn't a single voter in Canada who believes that's true. Like, money doesn't go into Ottawa and suddenly multiply into more money than was taken in. It's, that's saying you essentially have a negative program administration cost. That doesn't exist for anything in Ottawa.
Do excise taxes make smoke cheaper? Is that because shouldn't they? Isn't that the same logic?
Yeah,
having failed at convincing people that they would get back as much as they put in on the carbon tax, they're now attempting to tell people they get back more, which is the most counterintuitive thing.
Going great.
You get a suit
but it's a deal you can't lay off. More feeling.
I'm gonna keep eating more until I lose weight, right? Like I'm gonna eat my way to a smaller waistline. It's nuts. Like it's impossible to sell that because it's garbage. Like but it's made even more transparently false by their own actions. You can't say that you're going to eliminate the carbon tax on home heating fuel for a period of time because it's adversely affecting affordability, and then tell everyone else everywhere else that actually this has nothing to do with affordability. In fact, it's positive on the affordability front. Like, they can't even get their fucking story straight. So like, I think not only is it difficult to try to sell this, it's impossible to sell it. Like, this is, trying to tell people that shit smells like roses. Well, it doesn't. Sorry. And no amount of marketing is going to convince people that that's true, no matter how much you rub your nose in it.
Before we hear from Jordan, can I just interrupt you guys with a piece of breaking news I literally just received that's relevant to this discussion? So David on the last pod and myself, and both David and I privately, have been very critical of Bonnie Crombie's failure to denounce the carbon tax out of the chute when she was asked about it. 20 minutes ago, she did. And so a Star story just broke, and her communications team just sent me an alert highlighting the story. I think quite possibly as a message to you and I, David, alerting us to that fact. So now she is saying, so just two, the Anthony Furys, the opposition leaders, Bonnie Crombie, new leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, has just come forward, and she's actually issued a fundraising appeal that makes the same point. So this is orthodox now. This is canon for the Ontario Liberal Party, that it will not support a carbon tax.
Right.
Well, if you thought the marketing job of selling the carbon tax as affordability is difficult, I think the only more difficult task that I can imagine is Bonnie Crombie trying to sell that she's against carbon taxes.
Oh, Kory just wheels.
Yeah, just wheels.
That's right. And
So,
I'm duty bound also to remind everybody that the only reason we really care about what Anthony Furey thinks is because he's the last standing Liberal premier in the country. So,
nice shot at Newfoundland. Wow. Holy lifting. What a come from away you are.
Looking down on the Newfoundland.
I mean, they make their own choices. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, they can make their own choices. Those cute little people. They're not too swift, but they can make their own choices. They're free to do that.
Jordan, can I ask you this question?
Yeah.
When you talk about the Liberals walking away from the carbon tax, the rebuttal you get, and I think it's in Althea Raj's column, and you see it in a bunch of places, which is, oh my God, A, you're giving a tremendous victory to Poilievre. And secondly, what a bad day that is for you to have to climb down on your signature policy and abandon something you defended. What a terrible day. And my response to that, Jordan, is I'd rather have a terrible day this week than a terrible day election day, right? And so I don't get it.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely something to be said for living to die another day, because I don't think that that's the path that they're on right now. And look, I think that they've got two fundamental issues here. And one of them is that they need a time machine, because their problems in messaging on the carbon tax are not new, right? This has now, I would say, solidly stretched for a year. But there were several junctures along the way where they could have chosen differently. And what I think has struck everybody around this table and many others is just they seem frozen in place, and they seem unable to pivot their communications to address any of these problems, and unable to come up with a plan to confront some of the challenges that even they themselves have put in their own way. And so, to give a few examples, you have... So the original sin, obviously, is the carve out on home heating for Atlantic Canada, because once you admit that there's an affordability issue, you've started unraveling, right? So the fact
the original sins of the tax, it was inherently going to be unpopular.
Well, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think that's debatable. I think that if you had a real time machine, you went way back and you messaged things entirely differently. I think that there are alternate paths where this isn't the flashpoint that it is. But I think that it is inaction and a lack of flexibility on the government's part in terms of how they talk about and how they act around this that has set us to the place where we are today, which is that they are, I think, pretty much fucked, because they have now painted themselves into a place where the policy is viewed as having no integrity through actions of their own, because they have acquiesced to a corner of the argument that it's an affordability problem, and they had themselves began the unraveling. So I think that bad day already occurred, right? In a lot of ways. The other problem, of course, is that you are dealing with a situation now where the carbon tax is so integral to how Trudeau views his own legacy that I think that him personally and the team around him cannot conceive of unraveling it from him. And that they're now confronting things like Saskatchewan's decision to not obey federal law, which I think we should continue to remember is a pretty big deal, a pretty big fucking deal. And that it still seems to be a shrug. Like there was no.
Well, they don't have a response. They didn't.
Well,
that's
right.
clear.
No
that's clear
strong,
from the interview with Rosemary Barton. It's yet to be seen what the government's response will be to WOW.
And then the last piece is that, so they decided at some point about a month ago that they were going to really message hard on the rebate, as we've talked about, that this was going to become an affordability piece. Fine. A very, very valid path a year ago. But when that there was public domain data, like I'm just, November, for example, I think Angus Reid was out, and you had data that showed that even among people who know that they receive a rebate, which is less than half of Canadians, right, on average, half of them think that they are paying more than they're getting back. So you had early signals that there was really strong problems with even people's understanding of the rebate, even when they fucking know that they're getting it. So to now kind of glom onto it as this is going to be our messaging path out of it, I think it's just completely divorced from everything that even they know about how Canadians are understanding this problem. And then the last issue that they have, and I'm increasingly persuaded that this is just an unsolvable facet of how Trudeau behaves when backed into a corner, is that his communication on this, and Wilkinson dipped a toe in this too this week, is absurd. It's absurd, and it's condescending, and it reinforces some of his very worst habits in terms of how he talks about these issues with Canadians. And don't get me wrong, I do think climate change is a moral imperative. I think it's one of the great issues of our time, and I think we will be judged as a country in terms of how we do or don't deal with it. But you cannot lecture voters. And you cannot lecture voters by saying and suggesting that you are better than them, and that this is to be done because it is a virtuous thing, and that anyone who argues against it is a wrong and bad person. And that's exactly the argument that we saw him.
Or dumb. If you understood this issue as I do, then you would agree with me.
And then there was the Mulrooney language, right? The obvious Mulrooney inspiration
the greats. Right,
tough decisions.
To place yourself,
right? Take the long view. Not popular.
So right. To try to place yourself among there. No, sorry, dude, you're in the ring still. You don't get to do that. And I think that I'm just really struck by how the cognitive dissonance and the disconnect that is required to, on the one hand, to go out and, for example, to end where I started, to go and accuse Anthony Furey of bowing to political pressure when you yourself were the author of a purely political reversal of a component of your own cornerstone plan, and then to go out and somehow your offering is to suggest that those who have an issue with this policy are not moral enough. Like, you guys have just lost the plot. And I don't think it's reversible at this point, because to me, all of this suggests that they are just so stuck internally that even if they were to consider seriously using the April 1st as a place to hit pause, I don't think they could do it. I don't think they could do it operationally. I think it's too baked. And that is deadly.
Hey, panel, I bet $100 the NDP do not have carbon pricing in their platform, in their climate policy for the next election. Who wants my money?
Yeah, I think it's a safe. I think it's a safe bet.
You keep it.
I think it's a safe bet.
When you think of Wealthsimple, do you think about a modern financial company that's been around for 10 years? If you don't, that's okay. In fact, that's the reason they bought this ad, to tell you all the reasons over 3 million Canadians trust them with their money. Reasons like their no monthly fee, high interest checking account, low fee trading and investing accounts, and actually simple pay what you like tax filing program. In today's challenging economic environment, Canadians are looking for better ways to grow their money. According to the Minister of Finance, in a January speech, since the federal government launched the first home savings account in spring 2023, over 500,000 Canadians have jumped at the opportunity to open one. And when they had to decide which financial institution to trust with what will probably be the biggest investment of their lives, over 1/3 chose Wealthsimple. Not bad for a company that just turned 10. Canadians work hard for their money. Stay tuned over the next few weeks as we dive deeper into how Wealthsimple makes Canadians' money work harder for them. All right, our last topic today is, an outgrowth of this, really, and of the increasing troubles that the Liberals are having at the federal level, which is a pretty hard shift in Premier Doug Ford's posture towards Trudeau. Laid out in a public letter to the Prime Minister in advance of the budget, with a list of demands. Money, lots of it, for GO trains, for subways, for the Ring of Fire, fuck off on Highway 413, and drop the carbon tax. This is essentially what this letter says. And I mean, the demands are normal and on the table. It was the tone that really struck me, because it was a really sharp tonal difference from the way Ford has been talking about Trudeau and his government for years now. Less buddy-buddy, less partnership, more distant and demanding. Obviously, Ford wants some distance from an unpopular government, but is there more going on here, Scott?
Well, I think what's going on is significant. I know, because the elements of what he's saying seem like, well, those are obvious things for the Conservative Premier of Ontario to raise, and there are obvious points of difference. But as you say, the tone and the dramatic shift in tone, like even like a couple weeks ago, Doug Ford's bouncing around with those great big checks and he's handing them out from the Builder Fund, but he's also giving credit, for the Accelerator Fund. And he's, talking about like he has like Christian Freeland and he had movie night on Saturday and they put on like big warm Disney socks and curled up and watched
Expendables 4.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just such a dramatic tone. I know you I want to ascribe it to you because you've raised this off mic. Your point is it demonstrates not just that Ford wants to create difference with an unpopular prime minister, but that he also possibly has some anxiety about Liberal brand, and that maybe there's some resilience to Liberal brand in the province of Ontario, and he wants to be separating against that he can't take it for granted, and therefore, as part of the project of defeating Crombie in the next election, he wants to be positioning himself more aggressively against the Liberal brand. Whereas possibly before, he felt so comfortable in his position politically and electorally that he could afford to look like he was getting along with Liberals. Now, the word Liberal has to be painted in unpleasant colors. I think there's some truth to that observation. I don't think. But I do think the obvious thing is the obvious thing, which is that, the government, I'll go back to something Kory said a minute ago. The federal government keeps saying I'm fat and therefore I can lose weight. Give me a year and I can get slim. And everybody else, provincial premiers and now Doug Ford is saying, you're not fat, you're ugly and you can't fix ugly. Okay. And I don't want to stay next to somebody who's ugly. I don't want to be with anyone who's ugly. And so you're not fat and you can't lose weight. It's not that. It's that you're ugly and that's irreversible. And so bye-bye. And I think, it's goddamn. I hate listening to myself because I'm so negative against my own party. Like I am a partisan liberal and every single bit of analysis or observation I have to offer is bleak and unflattering. But that's where we are. It really is just raining steak knives on the government right now. And I think this is just another indication of it.
Oh, you're watching a really bad hand be played badly. So, Jordan, I think that Ford likes when the Liberals and the NDP in Ontario are in sync. I think he likes them both in the mid-20s, fighting it out, perfect splits. And I think the Liberals are starting to break out of that pack and become a challenger. And that's motivating this counteroffensive. What do you think?
I mean, I would tend to think it has more to do with Trudeau's unpopularity, right? Like there's obviously a personal rapport between Trudeau and Ford, and I suspect he has to be frequently reminded not to hug the sinking ship too much. And so a letter like this, to me, I think this is a little bit more about public posturing, but there's a lot of indications that behind closed doors that, they're still fairly close and I think communicating pretty well. And that makes sense because their vote coalition is overlaps quite a bit. But I do think that Trudeau and dealings with Trudeau, if you're a provincial premier and if there's a major fight being set up around carbon tax that you're a part of, you have to look oppositional on that. So I wouldn't necessarily read a ton into it around the fortunes of Bonnie Crombie, though I certainly understand the desire of others to do so.
She thinks I'm spinning, Kory. I bet you do.
You are spinning. You are spinning. Because the delta is about the same. So, it's, but it is interesting that Crombie is still less popular than Trudeau is, which is, pretty interesting the way you guys spin that Trudeau is dead fucking meat, yet Bonnie is the great white hope. Well, her numbers are worse. But anyway, I digress. Look, I don't think that there's anything terribly unusual or unique about what's happening with Ford and the federal government on this issue than what's happening with the other 7 premiers. And I'm going to predict it's going to be more than 7 soon. Because what everyone can do, they can read a poll, and the poll says that affordability is the number 1 issue. Housing is right up there too. Healthcare has fallen to number 3 in most polls. So, people are going to be focused on the problems that voters are focused on. And affordability is inextricably linked in the minds of voters right now with carbon tax. And you're not going to see anyone encouraging the federal government to raise that carbon tax, not once, but twice between now and the next federal election. Anyone with any brains in their head is going to be opposing it. And, look, I don't understand why the federal government has taken the position they have on highways, for instance, which, until very recently has been not to fund them, but to impose environmental impact analysis on them. So, interfere in provincial jurisdiction in an appropriate way. It looks like they're backing off that. That's good. But I think the path on a proper consumer-oriented carbon tax plan or carbon emission reduction plan is to scrap the tax and to instead go more the Biden path, more around regulation and encouragement as opposed to this taxation scheme that nobody thinks is legitimate. So there's other paths. I think you're going to see politicians of all stripes trying to lay those out. I just think some are going to have a lot bigger credibility issues around saying that they're, a policy that they have been in favor of for years now is something that they now oppose, and that includes the federal government. Like I think it's impossible without changing the leadership of the federal party to really back away from it now.
I don't know.
One reason why they got to get away from it, Jordan, is because the fucking thing is set to double again over the next number of years, right? So they're going into a campaign where they'll literally be saying at the door, when this thing is an issue on affordability, they're going to be at the door saying, if you elect us, we're going to double this fucker.
Yeah, I mean, look, they need a path out of this that makes some sense, but I think that they are frozen in place about how to deal with this, and they're just sitting there being punched, and that's unsurprisingly continuing. We have not found the floor yet, and I think that this is likely a big part of the reason, not necessarily the issue in and of itself, but just them sitting there taking the attacks with no coordinated response. It is deadly. But I was just going to say on the Ford letter, I do think it's also, the topics that Ford and his team are pushing to the top. So, Highway 413, all of the issues around the carbon tax, like those are also more favorable issues for Ford than talking about healthcare and housing starts, right? So it's also not a surprise to me that they would use a tool like this, a letter, to try to push those to the forefront for their own purposes internally and in Ontario as well.
All right. I think it is time to bring some decorum to these proceedings with the great Gordon Pinsent. To wrap this up, Mr. Pinsent.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Who's got a Hey You?
Well, mine rolls into what we were just talking about, so I'll maybe volunteer to go first.
Can you do it in Gaelic, though, please? I request.
Can you just show your shamrocks? They're very cute.
If you, there's my shamrocks.
There you go.
We'll find the bandwagon.
Yeah, if you think my French is bad, you should hear my Gaelic. It's even more atrocious.
Just need a few more.
I bet it was good last night.
Oh, it was very good.
Do you do this when you start drinking and you're in Ireland? Do you start to speak with an Irish accent? Because I do. I'm that obnoxious tit who starts saying, "Oh, is that right?" Oh, and they're like, why are you talking that way? Oh, I'm not talking anyway, don't you know? You're like the guy from Lucky Charms. Stop it. It's annoying.
I'm incapable of doing accents. Like I'll do an accent, but it'll morph into like Australian, then German. Like I don't know. It's a total mess. Anyway, back to my Hey You. Mine's to all the premiers and those aspiring to be premier. Like this is a moment of division around carbon tax. And I think everybody needs to stand up and be counted one way or another in terms of where they're at. And I'm going to particularly single out the folks in British Columbia because I think the other fight that we didn't really get into was the one between EB and Polyev. And I think there is a real risk for BC United. If Kevin Falcon doesn't come out against a carbon tax, I think he could get wiped off the map in British Columbia in the current environment. If there's only John Rustad opposing a carbon tax and the other two candidates are, for premier are in favor, I think that is a division line that is going to see BC Conservatives going way up and BC United potentially getting wiped out. So I think, for opposition leaders, I think that's an issue. Maybe a similar challenge to the one that Crombie has where when you're the one who brought in the carbon tax, it's pretty hard to say you're going to be the one who's going to get rid of it in terms of having a believable message. But I think it's worth trying if you're Kevin Falcon. That said, I think if EB's smart, he's going to get on that other side of this as well and come up with something other than a carbon tax. Because I just don't think there is a market that's big enough to win re-election in this environment if you're pro carbon tax. And I especially don't think there is a path to winning if you're an opposition leader who's in favor of carbon taxes as well. Like, I just think that pool is shrinking and it's too small for one party, let alone multiple parties.
Excellent. Thanks, Kory. Jordan?
All right. My hey you this week is uncharacteristically some free advice for conservative politicians. And it's on the topic of vaccines, because as you guys may have seen in the news, we have a problem with measles. So, we're just expecting the biblical plagues and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We're going back in time. We've got a problem with measles. And my hey you is going out to conservative politicians who've been flirting with anti-vaxxers. And I very much include Pierre Poilievre in this, because of course you'll remember last fall, he himself personally got up and delivered a rousing speech in favor of a private member's bill that was anti-vaccine mandate. And look, the last campaign, the Liberals were able to wedge you guys on the issue of COVID and vaccinations. So the good news is here, you get a redo, because we're about to have a public health problem of very similar proportions. We've got, in some communities, and actually a lot of these in Alberta, you've got places where there's only a 30% vaccination rate for this. So it's going to be a big fucking problem. We're going to have hundreds and hundreds of cases, if not more. So you have a chance to remove this vulnerability and to do a solid on public health by stopping your flirtation with this group of voters who are wackadoodle, right? So you can actually close this flank with the Liberals and do something good for public health. So that's my hey you. Don't fuck it up, please. A lot of us would really not like to return to the 1800s. Thank you.
Very good. Society could use a good measles outbreak. That's what I say.
Scott? Welcome back to Malthus Reflections, our new pod.
Really uplifting this week, guys.
Yeah. Well, my hey you, I'm just going to there's no point in varying from the tone or focus of this week's message and discussion and topic. And, again, you asked me to focus on Brownsville Girl Herle. I'm sure you're regretting it, because I'll just never end with the quotations from that song. God, I love it. But there's a line in that song where he says, I was crossing the street when shots rang out. I didn't know whether to duck or to run, so I ran. I'm saying to the Trudeau government, shots are ringing out, right? They're coming from everywhere. You don't know whether to duck or to run. You need to run. And I think you need to run on the carbon tax. I understand how core it is to the agenda of this government. I understand how forcefully you've argued in its favor. But I think something you said earlier, David, is really, really instrumental, which is that people are unpersuaded, and I think with reason, that it is instrumental, that it is material to combating climate change. They don't see how it directly, they don't see the straight line from the carbon tax to lower emissions, a better climate, and improving climate. And in the absence of that, you cannot ask people to sacrifice if there is no payoff. If there's no theoretical payoff, if there's no practical payoff, you are selling stones and telling people it's bread. It will not work. It will get worse. And I think that, as painful as it is, as inconceivable as it seems, given that it is your signature flagship policy, I think you have to not duck, but run.
Yeah. Excellent. Couldn't agree more. My consistent with everybody else, my hey you goes out to Premier Fury and to all the other Liberal leaders in the country. I know that you are feeling a lot of pressure about your position against this carbon tax increase. Don't buckle under to it. Do what you need to do, because there's a rebuild for this party coming in a few years, and we're going to need strong provincial parties as the base for that rebuild. So, Premier Fury, you do what you need to do to remain successful in Newfoundland. And Bonnie Crombie, you do what you need to do to win Ontario. And Ms. Holt, do what you need to do to win New Brunswick. Don't be caving into pressure from the PMO on this. Keep your provincial party strong and vibrant. Anyway, that's my hey you for this week. Thank the three of you for chatting with me. Had a great time. This was, a great time. Scott says, it's just dreadful in some respects, these conversations. Kory's grin is
I'm
getting
enjoying
bigger
it.
every week. Anyway, it's great to hang out with the three of you. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, U15 Canada, Bruce Power, and Wealth Simple. And obviously, I want to thank all of you accursed for watching or listening to the show, and we'll see you next week with more of the Curse of Politics. Kory will be in Canada, pretty sure. See you then.
Pretty sure.